Marcus Chen had seen strange things during his 20 years as an interstellar freight hauler. But nothing prepared him for what lay half-buried in the crimson sands of Kepler 442c. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for 3 standard days when he picked up the signal, weak and distorted through the planet's electromagnetic storms. Most pilots would have logged the coordinates and moved on. Emergency beacons were common out here in the frontier systems, usually marking crashed smugglers or failed colony attempts. But Marcus had always been different from other humans, in ways that made alien species both fascinated and frustrated. Where others saw problems, he saw puzzles. Where others calculated risks, he calculated possibilities. The beacon led him to what appeared to be an ancient structure, its metallic walls jutting from beneath centuries of accumulated sand. The architecture was unlike anything in the galactic databases, with flowing curves that seemed to pulse with dormant energy. Most species would have called for a xenoarchaeology team and waited months for approval. Marcus grabbed his excavation tools and started digging. 3 hours later, sweat mixing with the gritty sand particles in the thin atmosphere, he uncovered what looked like a containment chamber. Through the translucent surface, he could see her. The woman was clearly not human, though humanoid enough that his brain struggled to categorize her. Scales covered portions of her skin in patterns that shifted color even in stasis, and what appeared to be vestigial wing structures extended from her shoulder blades. Most striking were her eyes, visible even through the preservation field, glowing with an inner fire that suggested intelligence and perhaps rage. The chamber's control panel was a maze of symbols that meant nothing to him. But Marcus had learned long ago that human intuition often succeeded, where alien logic failed. He pressed his palm against what felt like the central node, and the ancient systems hummed to life. Warning symbols flashed, but he ignored them. In his experience, alien warning systems were usually overly cautious. The stasis field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The woman's eyes snapped open, immediately focusing on his face with an intensity that made him step backward. She sat up slowly, her movements predatory and controlled, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in his chest. "You are not of the Dominion," she said. Her words somehow understandable despite being in no language, he recognized. "What manner of being are you?" "Human," Marcus replied, offering his hand to help her from the chamber. "Marcus Chen, freight pilot out of Earth Colony 7. Been following your beacon for days." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. Her skin was warm, almost hot to the touch, and he could feel strength in her grip that could probably crush his bones if she chose. Instead, she used his support to stand, towering over his 6-foot frame by at least 8 inches. "Human," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "I am Vira, Shadowscale, of the Draconian hegemony, or was, before the Dominion decided my people were too dangerous to exist freely." She gestured to the chamber. 500 years I have been imprisoned here, watching through the preservation field as my homeworld burned." Marcus felt that familiar human response to injustice, the one that had gotten him into trouble countless times before. "Who's this Dominion? And why did they lock you up instead of just killing you?" Vira's laugh was bitter, accompanied by small jets of flame from her nostrils. "They tried killing us first. But Draconians are not easily destroyed. So they developed these prisons, scattered us across dead worlds, hoping we would be forgotten." Her glowing eyes fixed on him again. "But you found me. Why did you not simply take what technology you could carry and leave?" The question caught Marcus off guard because he had no good answer. Any sensible being would have done exactly that. Seemed wrong to leave someone trapped like that. "Besides, you were still broadcasting. Figured you wanted to be found." Something shifted in Vira's expression, a crack in what had been cold fury. "Your species is unknown to me, yet you risk yourself for a stranger. This is unusual, maybe," Marcus shrugged. "But that's kind of what we do. Sometimes it gets us in trouble. Sometimes it works out. Your people, they fighting back against this Dominion? My people are scattered, broken, or dead," Vira said, her voice heavy with centuries of grief. "The hegemony fell when I was young. Those who survived learned to hide, to serve, to forget what we once were. Feed. And in feed, Marcus started gathering his equipment, mind already racing ahead. Well, hiding doesn't seem to be working out too well. Maybe it's time to try something different. You speak as if you have a plan, human Marcus. I speak as someone who's seen what happens when good people do nothing, he replied, shouldering his pack. The universe is full of bullies who think might makes right. Someone needs to remind them they're wrong. Vira followed him toward the chamber exit, her movements silent despite her size. The Dominion controls 1,000 worlds, commands fleets that blot out stars. They have turned conquest into science. What could one human and one displaced draconian possibly accomplish against such power? Marcus paused at the threshold, looking back at the ancient prison that had held her for 5 centuries. Lady, I come from a species that once thought it was impossible to fly, then figured out how to travel between stars. We've got a saying back home. The best way to eat an elephant is 1 bite at a time. I do not understand this metaphor. Means you start with what you can do, then do a little more, then a little more after that. Before you know it, you've done something impossible. He activated his suit's external lights as they entered the tunnel leading to the surface. First bite is getting you off this rock and somewhere safe. After that, we figure out where the rest of your people are hiding. And then? Marcus grinned, an expression that had preceded numerous legendary human undertakings throughout history. Then we remind the Dominion why predators usually avoid prey. That fights back. Opennessly. Well, do my. Opennessly. As they emerged into the alien sunset, Vira felt something she had not experienced in half a millennium. Hope. This strange creature called human possessed something her captors had systematically tried to eliminate from the galaxy. Something they feared above all else. The willingness to act without certainty, to fight without guarantee of victory, to believe that right could triumph over might through sheer, stubborn refusal to surrender. She had been a warrior before her imprisonment, trained in the ancient ways of her people, but watching this small, soft creature calmly discuss taking on a galactic empire, she realized she might be witnessing the birth of something far more dangerous than any draconian ever was. The humans appeared to be natural revolutionaries. The stars were beginning to emerge as they reached Marcus's ship, a battered but reliable cargo hauler that had seen better decades. As he ran through pre-flight checks, Vira studied the humans' movements, noting the efficiency born of long practice and the confidence that came from competence. Marcus Chen, she said quietly, you may not realize what you have begun this day. He looked up from the navigation console, meeting her burning gaze with steady brown eyes. Maybe not. But someone had to begin it sometime. Might as well be today. As the ship lifted off from Kepler 442c, leaving the ancient prison behind in the sand, neither Marcus nor Vira could have imagined how their chance meeting would echo across the galaxy, or how the simple human concept of doing the right thing regardless of consequences would become the spark that ignited a revolution among the stars. The safe house on Terminus Station looked like every other cramped merchant quarters in the Outer Rim, which was exactly why Marcus had chosen it. 3 weeks had passed since Kepler 442c, and in that time, Vira had proven to be both an invaluable ally and a constant reminder of just how naive his initial rescue plan had been. The Dominion does not simply rule through force, she explained, her scaled fingers dancing across the holographic star chart they had assembled. They rule through fear, systematic cultural destruction, and the elimination of hope. Every species that has tried to resist them has been made an example. Marcus studied the data they had gathered during their travels, interviews with refugees and displaced beings throughout the frontier systems. The picture that emerged was grimmer than he had imagined. The Dominion was not just another authoritarian government. They were architects of galactic despair. The pattern is always the same, Vira continued. First, they identify species with what they term dangerous independence traits. Then they engineer conflicts, economic collapses, or natural disasters. When the target species is weakened, the Dominion arrives as saviors, offering protection in exchange for submission. And anyone who refuses ends up like the Draconians. Scattered, broken, forgotten. She gestured to herself with bitter irony. The lucky ones end up in stasis prisons. The others simply vanish. Marcus poured himself coffee, one of the few luxuries he allowed himself in the cramped quarters. The bitter taste reminded him of home, of Earth, of a species that had somehow avoided the Dominion's attention despite spreading across dozens of systems. How long has this been going on? 3,000 years, by the galactic standard calendar. They have perfected the art of slow conquest, taking perhaps a century to fully absorb each species. By the time anyone realizes the pattern, resistance becomes impossible. Except someone did figure it out, Marcus pointed out. Your people tried to fight back. Vira's expression darkened. The hegemony was proud, powerful, and utterly unprepared for the Dominion's true nature. We thought we faced simple conquest. We prepared for war, not for the systematic destruction of everything that made us who we are. Over the weeks together, Marcus had watched Vira struggle with concepts that humans took for granted. The idea of acting without complete information, of making decisions based on principle rather than probability of success, of believing that individual choices could matter against overwhelming odds. These were apparently uniquely human traits. I have been studying your species' history, Vira said, pulling up another holographic display. Your databases are quite comprehensive. What I find most disturbing is how often you have succeeded, despite impossibly poor odds. Marcus laughed. That's what we do best. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about something called World War II. Humans fighting other humans. But the principle was the same. Sometimes you fight because it's right, not because you can win. This troubles me. Why? Because it suggests that perhaps the Dominion's greatest error was not accounting for your species' particular form of insanity. Vira leaned back in her chair, studying him with those burning eyes. You rescued me not because you had a plan, but because leaving me trapped violated some internal principle you cannot even fully articulate. Sounds about right? And now you speak of finding other survivors, building a resistance, taking action against an empire that has conquered half the galaxy, still without a real plan. Marcus shrugged. Plans are overrated. The Dominion probably has great plans. How's that working out for everyone they've conquered? Before Vira could respond, the communication array chirped with an incoming message. Marcus activated the display, expecting another routine cargo inquiry. Instead, he found himself looking at a familiar face, one that made his blood run cold. Captain Chen, said the elegant woman on the screen, her blue skin and silver hair marking her as Altarian. My name is Administrator Kess of the Dominion Integration Authority. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Marcus glanced at Vira, who had gone completely still. Not sure what you're talking about, Administrator. Please do not insult my intelligence, Captain. The entity you removed from Kepler 442c is classified as a Class 9 dangerous xenobiological asset. Its containment was essential for galactic stability. She has a name, Marcus said, his voice hardening. And she's not an asset. Administrator Kess smiled, an expression devoid of warmth. I see the asset has already begun its psychological manipulation protocols. This is precisely why such creatures require containment. They prey upon the protective instincts of more stable species. Vira leaned into the communication pickup's field of view, her expression perfectly controlled. Hello, Kess. Still playing the reasonable administrator while your people burn worlds? Vira shadow scale. You are looking well for someone who should have remained in stasis indefinitely. Kess's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. I trust you have not been filling Captain Chen's head with fantasies of resistance, just telling him the truth about what you really are. The truth is that the galaxy enjoys unprecedented peace and prosperity under Dominion guidance, Kess replied. The truth is that species like yours, with your ancient resentments and violent instincts, represent a constant threat to that peace. Marcus had heard enough. Lady, I've been around the galaxy enough to know what peace looks like and what you're selling, isn't it? Captain, You are from a newly spacefaring species. You lack the historical perspective to understand the complexities of galactic governance. The Dominion has prevented countless wars, ended famines, brought technological advancement to primitive worlds, by enslaving them, by guiding them toward productive integration. The alternative is chaos, suffering, and eventual extinction. Kess leaned forward slightly. Return the asset to Dominion custody, and your species will be eligible for protected status. Continue this course, and humanity will be classified as a destabilizing influence. The threat was clear, but Marcus found himself grinning again. You know what, Administrator? I think we'll take our chances with destabilizing. This is your final warning, Captain. No, Marcus said, reaching for the communication cutoff. This is yours. The connection terminated, leaving them in silence. Virus stared at him with something approaching awe. You just declared war on the Dominion. Guy. No, I just told them to go to hell. There's a difference. Marcus began activating the ship's emergency protocols, preparing for immediate departure. How long before they track us down? Hours, not days. Kess was not bluffing about their resources. Vira moved to the navigation console with fluid efficiency. But there are places we can go. People who might listen. The Dominion's grip is tighter in the core systems, looser out here in the frontier. Good. Time to start making some noise. As Terminus Station fell away behind them, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that emergency beacon on Kepler 442c. 3 weeks ago, he had been a simple freight hauler trying to make an honest living. Now he was apparently a fugitive from galactic authority, harboring a dangerous alien and contemplating acts that could reasonably be classified as terrorism. The strange thing was how right it all felt. Marcus, Vira said quietly as they jumped to hyperspace, when Administrator Kess spoke of your species' protective instincts, she was not entirely wrong. But she misunderstood something fundamental, which is, humans do not simply protect those they care about. You protect abstract concepts. Justice, freedom, the right of beings to determine their own destinies. This is why the Dominion fears you, even if they do not yet realize it. Maybe. Or maybe we're just too stupid to know when we're outgunned. Vira's laugh was genuine this time, warm with affection and respect. Perhaps both. But I begin to understand why my people fought so hard before the end. It was not about victory. It was about proving that some things are worth dying for. Let's try to keep the dying to a minimum, Marcus said, but he understood what she meant. For the first time since her liberation, Vira was beginning to remember what it felt like to be draconian, and Marcus was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be human in a galaxy that had forgotten the value of defiance. Behind them, across the hyperspace wake their ship had left, Dominion forces were already mobilizing. Administrator Kess had not been lying about their capabilities, but she had made one crucial error in her assessment of the threat they faced. She had assumed that Marcus Chen was an isolated anomaly, one misguided human who could be dealt with through conventional means. She had not considered the possibility that humans might be naturally resistant to the despair and hopelessness that the Dominion used as weapons. And she certainly had not considered what might happen when a species incapable of knowing when they were beaten encountered others who had forgotten they could fight back. The hidden base on Carthage's third moon had once been a mining operation, abandoned when the ore played out decades ago. Now, it bustled with activity as beings from across the galaxy gathered around makeshift tables, their voices creating a babble of languages that universal translators struggled to parse. Marcus stood before the assembled crowd, acutely aware that he was probably the least qualified person in the room to be leading anything. 6 months had passed since Administrator Kess's ultimatum. 6 months of running, hiding, and spreading what the Dominion called seditious propaganda. But what Marcus simply called the truth. The response had been overwhelming and terrifying in equal measure. Species thought extinct emerged from hiding. Refugees revealed themselves as displaced nobility from conquered worlds. Most surprising of all, Dominion citizens began making contact. Beings who had lived under the Empire's rule, but never forgotten what freedom felt like. The network now spans 47 systems, reported Threx. a mantis-like Catherian whose people had been among the Dominion's earliest conquests. We have safe houses established on 18 worlds, and 3 separate supply lines running weapons and equipment. Vira moved through the crowd with easy authority, her presence somehow making the desperate gathering feel more like a legitimate military operation. The months on the run had changed her as much as they had changed Marcus. The bitter, broken survivor he had freed from Kepler 442c had evolved into something the galaxy had not seen for millennia, a draconian war leader in her prime. The Dominion response has been predictable. She continued the briefing where Threx left off. Increased patrols in frontier systems, new restrictions on civilian travel, and enhanced surveillance of all communications. They are attempting to isolate us through fear. Marcus studied the holographic display showing Dominion fleet movements. The pattern was clear. They were slowly tightening a noose around the outer rim territories, cutting off escape routes and supply lines. It was methodical, efficient, and probably unstoppable by conventional military means. Fortunately, nothing about their operation was conventional. "They're making the classic mistake," Marcus said, addressing the room. "They're fighting the war they want to fight, instead of the war we're actually giving them." A rumble of agreement passed through the assembled beings, though Marcus caught several confused expressions. The concept of asymmetrical warfare was apparently foreign to most galactic species, who seemed to prefer straightforward conflicts with clear objectives and predictable outcomes. "The Dominion expects us to gather forces, claim territory, and engage their fleets directly," Vira explained, taking up Marcus's thread. "This is how every previous resistance movement has operated, and this is why they all failed." "So what do we do instead?" asked Commander Zara, a former Dominion naval officer whose entire family had disappeared after questioning integration policies. Her presence was proof that cracks were forming in the Empire's seemingly monolithic structure. Marcus activated a different display, this one showing not fleet positions but communication networks, supply chains, and administrative structures. "We do what humans have always done when faced with overwhelming force. We become ungovernable." The plan they outlined was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of trying to match the Dominion's military might, they would attack the foundations of imperial control. Communication relays would suffer mysterious malfunctions. Supply convoys would lose their way in hyperspace. Administrative centers would find their data networks corrupted by untraceable viruses. "The goal is not to destroy the Dominion," Marcus explained, "but to make governing us more trouble than it's worth." "And if they escalate?" asked Dr. Yanari, a Centaurian biochemist whose homeworld had been strip-mined for rare elements. "If they decide to make examples of resistant populations?" The room fell silent. This was the fear that kept many potential allies from joining them, the knowledge that Dominion reprisals were swift and brutal. Vira stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of centuries. "Then we show the galaxy what the Dominion truly is. Their power rests on the illusion of benevolent authority. Force them to reveal their true nature often enough, and even their supporters will begin to question." Over the following weeks, the strategy began to unfold across the frontier territories. The operations were small, seemingly unconnected, and appeared to be the work of ordinary criminals or technical failures. A communication satellite malfunctioned during a crucial military coordination. A supply depot's automated systems began delivering equipment to the wrong destinations. A data processing center suffered a cascade failure that corrupted months of integration reports. The beauty of the approach was that it leveraged uniquely human capabilities while playing to the strengths of their diverse allies. Humans excelled at improvisation and creative problem-solving. Draconians brought ancient military wisdom and unmatched individual combat skills. The various other species contributed specialized knowledge, local networks, and resource access. Marcus found himself spending most of his time traveling between cells, coordinating operations, and recruiting new allies. It was during one such mission to the industrial world of Ferrum Prime that everything changed. The meeting was supposed to be routine, a simple information exchange with a group of factory workers who had been reporting increased surveillance and loyalty screening. Instead, Marcus walked into a trap that revealed just how seriously the Dominion was taking their activities. Administrator Kess waited for him in the abandoned warehouse, flanked by a squad of Dominion peacekeepers whose weapons were already trained on the entrance. But what made Marcus's blood run cold was the figure kneeling between them. Her scaled hands bound with energy shackles that pulsed with painful electric discharges. "Captain Chen," Kes said pleasantly, "so good of you to join us. I believe you are acquainted with the asset." Vira raised her head, meeting Marcus's eyes with a gaze that burned with fury and something else he couldn't quite identify. "It's a trap," she said unnecessarily. "They were waiting." "Of course they were," Marcus replied, surprising himself with how calm his voice sounded. "Question is, what do they want?" "Quite simple, really," Kes answered. "You will surrender yourself and cease all resistance activities. In exchange, the asset will be returned to containment rather than terminated. And your co-conspirators will face standard integration procedures rather than elimination." Marcus looked around the warehouse, noting the positions of the peacekeepers, the available cover, the distance to various exits. None of it looked promising. "And if I refuse, then I will demonstrate why the Dominion does not negotiate with terrorists." Kes nodded to one of her soldiers, who adjusted his weapons setting with an ominous whine of charging capacitors. "Marcus," Vira said quietly, "do not do this thing. The resistance is larger than any one person. It will continue without you." Marcus looked for Margar, but Marcus was already moving, not toward surrender, but toward the explosive charges he had set throughout the warehouse as a precaution. The Dominion had superior technology, better training, and overwhelming numbers. What they lacked was the human willingness to embrace chaos when order favored the enemy. The explosion that followed would later be described in Dominion incident reports as a terrorist attack that resulted in the destruction of valuable infrastructure and the regrettable loss of civilian life. What the reports failed to capture was the moment when Administrator Kes, thrown clear by the blast but injured and disoriented, watched a human cargo pilot carry a supposedly contained dangerous asset through fire and debris toward an impossible escape. They reached Vira's hidden ship more dead than alive, both of them bearing injuries that would scar. As the vessel lifted off from Ferrum Prime's surface, Marcus slumped in the pilot's seat, adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. "You could have been killed," Vira said, her voice rough with emotion. "I am not worth such a risk." Marcus looked at her, this magnificent being who had become so much more than the prisoner he had freed months ago. "That's where you're wrong. You're worth exactly that risk. Everyone is." It was then that Vira understood what had truly changed her during their time together. Marcus had not just freed her from a physical prison, but from something far more insidious. The Dominion's greatest weapon, the belief that resistance was futile, that individual actions could not matter against overwhelming force. Watching him plan their impossible escape from Ferrum Prime, she had seen something that the galaxy had forgotten existed. She had seen hope with teeth, kindness armed with fury, and the absolute human refusal to accept that might made right. "What happens now?" she asked as they jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Dominion forces far behind. "Now we get back to work," Marcus said, already plotting courses to their next safe house. "We've got a galaxy to uncover." Behind them, across the burning remains of the warehouse on Ferrum Prime, Dominion investigators found something that would eventually work its way up the chain of command to the highest levels of Imperial authority. Scratched into a piece of debris, apparently by a sharp claw, were words in the ancient Draconian script that had been forbidden for centuries. When translated, the message was simple but profound in its implications. "We do not forget. We do not forgive. We do not surrender." It was signed with two names: Vira Shadowscale, last daughter of the hegemony, and Marcus Chen, first son of humanity. Below that, in a dozen different scripts representing species from across the galaxy, other names began to appear as word of the message spread. The Dominion had spent 3 millennia building an empire based on the systematic elimination of hope. They had never encountered a species that produced hope as a renewable resource, that could inspire it in others.